And here we are. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tullio Siragusa. I am here to welcome the brand new Radical World podcast. And today we're going to launch this new series, this new podcast, speaking with the OG of Radical, the pioneers of Radical World. I'm speaking with Matt Perez and Jose Leal. Welcome. Looking forward to chatting with both of you.
Same here.
So before we go into how this whole thing began, why it began, and the story behind, even though there's a book, let's talk about what is radical. What is Radical World? Give us a little your view on what Radical World is to you, for the audience's benefit.
You want to take it on, or Jose, or you want me to start?
Well, for me, Radical World it's the goal of what we want to be. We want to have a world that is radical, a world that's tied to who we are as people, bound to us and our lives, not just thinking about work, not just thinking about us personally, but how our world works. And that's part of what I think we've transitioned from this idea that we are just working on radical companies or just working on radical purpose, but to think about the fact that we're working on seeing and becoming a radical world.
Cool. What about you, Matt? What does it mean to you?
Primarily an alternative. So radical world is an alternative. It eventually will become what he's describing, maybe, but right now the only alternatives you have is, I need money for this, I need money for that, I need money for the other. And our answer is no. You have an alternative, which is working with the scheme, so it's less capital intensive, it's more contribution intensive. And so we recognize contributions. Again, going back to the people are the force behind businesses. People are the force behind companies. And in fact, we chose the word company because in Latin it means people that break bread together. And that's what it's really all about. We're just people. We break bread together, or get together to do things, and hierarchy and all that stuff is in the way. So that's what Radical World means to me. It's an alternative to the current world, but they're going to be side by side for a long time.
Great. So I've heard a lot of desire for authenticity, for being real, for genuine connection. And so, when I joined you guys for this crazy journey about 6 years ago, each of you had a story as to why this was meaningful. So I'd love to hear, for the benefit of the audience, why Radical World? What prompted this? Let's start with you, Jose.
Well, I think I've told my story a number of times, but I had been an entrepreneur since I was 16. I had started a number of companies, one of which I sold. I got into corporate. And after 10 years, I was burned out. I didn't realize I was burned out. I thought I was just fed up with the company and they were a bunch of whatevers. But I was burnt out, and I quit the industry. I quit the company and started another startup, which I'd prepped for. If you're a good entrepreneur, you prep for it before you leave the last one. And turned out I couldn't get psyched up for it. Mm. I couldn't get motivated. Every time things got a little bit promising as a startup, you have lots of times that things don't look very promising. And then they look promising, and that's when you get the energy, and that's when you you advance things. And for me, I wound up stepping back rather than stepping forward, and kept doing that and realizing that working for corporate did a lot more to me than I thought it had.
Mm.
It had reduced my confidence, reduced my motivation. And I started on a journey of, why did that happen? Why did working for a corporation change me in the way that I couldn't even know who I was anymore?
Wow.
So
It's-
that process started me on a search of, well, what's happening when we go to work? What's happening to us in our society? And years later ran into Matt and started this journey from there. But there was a lot of soul searching and understanding what it is that we're doing to people through work and other aspects of our society.
It's fascinating how many people I've spoken to over the years who've had similar success in the corporate world, but there's been a high cost associated with that success. And sometimes that cost is significant enough to change someone's psyche. So, okay, let's hear a little bit about Matt. How did you join this journey, and why?
Well, it was funny, but it was about selling the company, the nearshore company we both worked in. After we sold it, I started thinking, why am I getting more than the people that did the real growth? You know, I did a lot of starting, fine. We created the company, went through bad times, good times, and all that shit. But excuse my French. And but I started thinking, why am I getting so much? It's because I own the thing, and that's why I started thinking that ownership is part of the problem. What we call fiat ownership is part of the problem, and very intelligent people, very world-renowned, intelligent people can't see past ownership. I wrote down the other day that we're in a fiat world of our own making. This is not, somebody going into a rec room and deciding what it is. And but the walls of this cocoon is fiat ownership. And in the conversations that Jose and my son Adrian and I were having, it came out. I didn't know what it was. Okay, it wasn't like I woke up one day, I had the whole thing in my head. I didn't know what it was, but in the conversation, it came out that there are lots of things that are taken for granted that are not constructive. I mean, businesses, it won't make a difference between business and company. Okay, businesses are the worst enemies of businesses because they want to do everything according to the owner, and you have a hierarchy where there's sub owners and all that stuff, and it's always according to them. So the only goal they have is making money. That's it, making money for the shareholders, and they try their best, I'm sure, to say it and communicate. And
Hi,
stuff.
Carlos.
But
Hang on, so that he can cut that piece. Okay, go.
okay, and but it's a holdback. People talk about innovation, for example.
Yeah.
And
We're going to talk a little bit more about fiat and what it is in follow-up episodes. So I'm going to plant the seed for that for the audience to come back to learn about that. But what I've heard from both of you is this idea that even though at the heel of a lot of success, you felt very unfulfilled. And that's what I've heard very loud and clear.
Yeah,
So,
and I'm going to add to that, Tullio, because I think there's, I want to speak for Matt for a minute. Matt worked in a corporation before doing a startup, Nearsoft, right? And he'd experienced that. So that's the reason he did Nearsoft as a self-managed organization in part, right?
Yeah.
So his experience in moving from a corporate environment to an environment that he had some control over, he and his partner, and the fact that he was introduced to this idea of self-management is what brought that about. For me, I didn't have that experience. I didn't have the experience of running, but when I did my startups, I always had this inkling that that's kind of what I wanted. I just didn't know what it was or how to do it. It was sort of like, I remember with my last startup, the one that I couldn't get traction on, what I found was that I said to my partners, I said, what if we do this in a way where we're, it's all of us have the ability to run the show and so forth. And they're like, no, you're the CEO and this is this and that's that. And I was like, okay. And one of my partners was our lawyer. So, it was like, okay, all right, that's the best way to do it. So very often, I think people have this sense that they want something different. And I certainly did. But it wasn't until after corporate where I realized what the difference was and what we needed to do that was different. And to speak one little bit more about how Matt and I got together, it was me having conversations with Doug Kirkpatrick from Morningstar Tomato Farms, and saying, there's this movement, this self-management movement, and I'm trying to figure out something more than that. It's something more than just self-management. And he says, well, I think you should talk to Matt, because he's thinking about something more than just self-management as well.
So let's continue with this journey. Also, I'm probably thinking when you all started this, you probably had hair, right? Full head of hair?
No, he pulled all of my hair out. I used to have hair.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about this One Life meeting. That was a kind of a instrumental, pivotal moment for both of you, was it not? Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
Well, we had another thing in common, which is we both had read a lot about neuroscience and stuff like that, hoping that the brain has something to do with what we do, and it does, but not as significant as we all thought before we started. So we had that in common. We started talking about it. He shared some things that he had done, and Jose did, and that's what got us talking. And we were thinking of a startup, and we can do this, and we can put these things in the hierarchy, and we tried all kinds of ideas. And what it came down to is that the system we live in, the fiat system that we live in, doesn't let us do it. It makes it invisible to us. It's like, no, you have to have a corporate lawyer and contracts, and somebody has to be the CEO, and somebody. That's bullshit. That goes against the nature of building something bigger than yourself. And we didn't. We started before the pandemic, because I remember meeting at a coffee shop, and then we started doing it like this remotely, and that's what we included Adrian, and then it was a three-way thing, and that quite helped. That quite put the rails on it of what we had to do, and the things that we didn't like that we had to fix. And we had lots of arguments. We still have lots of arguments, but but in the end, we come up with something different. I don't want to call it better, but it's different, and we need to try something different.
To answer your question about that meeting, I think what we found out was that there was a lot of people around the world that wanted something different too.
Yeah.
Right. And they were so excited about the idea that we could do something different that within, I think, about 3 weeks, some of our colleagues from Europe decided, hey, let's jump on a plane, land in San Jose, California, where Matt and I both lived at the time. You came up from Southern California, and a number of other people from local here. And we had the first meeting where it was super energizing to connect with people that had a similar passion. And we didn't have the Radical brand at that time, and we didn't even know exactly what it is that we were trying to do. But it was the beginning of a community, the beginning of a network, and the beginning of an understanding that it's not just us. That was super invigorating, that everyone had their own ideas, had their own ways of seeing the world, had their own experience, but most importantly, they all wanted to see something different. They weren't happy with the status quo.
Right.
I remember a Circle Up check-in. There were a lot of crying open hearts in that Circle Up check-in. It was a very touching moment. So from there, all these folks got together and started thinking about maybe creating something, a movement or a manifesto of sorts. And Radical Purpose came out of that. Tell us a little bit about that journey. What is Radical Purpose? How did that come to be? What were some of the milestones that were put in place as a result of those efforts? Because that was foundational to everything else that happened as well. So maybe walk us through a little bit of that before we talk about the book too.
Yeah, well, I think that because Matt and I see the world somewhat differently, for me, the idea that what we were talking about was the people. It was us, right? Understanding us better. And I think Matt was more focused on the company. How do we reorganize companies? How do we change companies? And so I started taking some of the folks that came from that initial meeting and others and bringing them together to have conversations around what slowly became Radical and Radical Purpose, and we tried all kinds of ideas of what that would look like. But the idea was, if we as human beings are what motivates work, and we have these innate desires, these innate feelings, this energy to do things, we need to understand that before we can understand what an organization can do with that. Because if we don't understand that, then the organization part of it is at a loss. It's a bit of sort of a chicken and egg. What comes first, right? Mm-hmm. If people aren't energized, how can they how can we count on them to be organized in a way that is productive, that is beneficial to the community? So the work was to explore that. What does this world of our internal selves, a Radical Purpose, meaning that we're born with our unique pattern of behaviors and desires and feelings, and that unique pattern dictates to some degree what it is that we're good at or are going to do or be. And that work continued over the years. We've had ambassadors, we've done dozens and dozens of workshops, and learned through that process around what radical purpose is at an individual level, but also how it relates to how we do work.
Yeah, I remember, actually thinking about it, hindsight 2020, the effort and the work that went into that is probably a great use case for design thinking, because there was so much time spent being curious and asking questions and being curious and asking more questions and having conversations and going back and forth, which is part of the empathizing stages, that it really informed everything else. And there's some great things that came out of that. Let's talk about that. One of the things came out of these, this understanding of the key elements that makes highly engaged organizations, and that also ties into individual needs. Also, some really great work came out of it from a self-assessment tool that came out of it, similar to Briggs or DISC, et cetera, except this is a lot deeper. So let's talk a little bit about some of that effort, the people involved, and what that was like, getting to this place of the Radical Purpose Manifesto as well, the Manifesto of Interdependence. Great work. That took years to do. It wasn't rushed. While some of us were more business minded, we wanted to rush it. It was always like, no, let's spend a little more time. So let's talk a little bit about that. What was that experience like? Maybe let's start with Matt, get your thoughts on that.
You want to hear from me on that?
Yeah. Developing the manifesto, the Interdependence Manifesto. Tell us a bit about what that experience was like for you.
No, I wasn't part of that. At least I don't remember it that way.
We were all part of that.
Yeah, well, Matt
Jose can chime in.
Well, so I think that speaks to, I think this is an important part, because it speaks to our focus is a little bit different individually, right? When we were talking about later, when we were talking about the book, I was very passionate about the idea that we, the work we had been doing with Radical Purpose, the meaning, impacting, belonging, becoming, was a critical part of understanding motivation. And so in the book, meaning and belonging became two key parts of what we need to serve in individuals, that the organization actually needs to serve that part. And so that work was around not necessarily the organization, but understanding us individually, understanding our needs, being able to, you talk about the Radical Purpose profile, being able to have a tool that points to, what part of me is there that I may not know, that I could speak to others about. But also the idea that what we want to do is with the interdependence, it was the idea that we could create a document that stated that we want to work together as equals, that we want to be with each other as equals, not the same, very importantly, but as equals, and the relationship to life, because all too often we forget that we're life. And so that work was, as you said, and I thank you for that, because it was a long time. It was an exploration, and it was, we had folks from Italy and folks from the Netherlands and Brazil, and lots of people contributed to that in many, many ways. And the output of it was us being here today with a different set of eyes than we would have had we not had that experience, and been able to to take it to the work of the book and to the world, the radical world now.
Yeah, I love the discovery that came out of that, which was about how we're very close to nature. Interdependence is just like nature, which is could also be another use case for the value of servant leadership. How nature is in constant service to itself, and it never stops serving the need of itself. It is constantly giving. It doesn't say, hey, I'm lesser. It just gives. And that whole ecosystem continues and lasts forever. But yet, for some reason, we as humans, even though we're part of that nature, we don't act that way.
No,
Something's broken because we don't act that way.
No,
So,
we've learned not to act that way.
Exactly.
We've been taught not to act that way.
So let's continue a little further down the line. You talked about the book. So a lot of work went into this, a lot of discoveries, great self-managed practitioners, even some psychologists participated in this. It was an incredible international effort. And then the pinnacle was the release of the book, Radical Companies. Let's tell the audience a little bit about what that was like, what your intention was behind that, and your intended outcomes. Anything you could share about that journey with the audience would be great.
Well, the way the book started, it was about more of an homage to the near stuff that was, and how it was inspired by Maverick, Ricardo Semola's first book, and all that. But then during the conversation, this is an important part. People have to learn new habits, granted. But until they get together, nothing happens. There's no action. That's my take. So it's a community that makes things happen. And for the sake of where I was heading and we were heading, companies became the name of the title. These days are a lot more relaxed about using communities, the term communities. But it's the same thing. It's a company is made up of a community of people that embody it. And that's what came out of many conversations, many arguments, many pastries and coffees and things like that. So when did it exactly happen? I don't know. But at some point, it starts to shift. It starts to make more sense by shifting that we don't need bosses. We don't need hierarchy. We're all adults. And if at home I buy this refrigerator instead of that refrigerator, it's a decision, it's a $3,000 decision that my wife and I make, and I'm not her boss. God knows I'm not her boss. And she's not my boss either. And God knows.
Well, at least you think.
It's more of a, well, this one has handles this way and is up and down. You make a lot of big decisions. Buying a car is a big decision. Buying a house in this neighborhood is a big decision. And you make all of those without a boss. So why not at work? And once you're thinking that way, it changes. It changed. The book was written like 3 times. It changed the direction of what you want to write about. So first it was an homage to Nearsoft, then it became the book that it is today, which is, what do we have now? There's still the first part of the homage to where we came from, because that was part of the experience that I lived. And but the co-management is not enough. When people say, and we know some of the characters, you and I, Tullio, that said things like, we want people to feel like they're owners of the company. Make them owners of the company.
Yeah.
Right? That's the way to do it. No, because there's too many of yous and too many of ours, and all kinds of excuses come up. And that's part of what's holding it back, is we want people to think like owners, but not be owners.